Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today we are looking at something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's a text called Pasted Text, and it's got a unique take
Okay.
on the Four Noble Truths. As you all know, the Four Noble Truths are kind of a pillar of Buddhist thought,
Mm-hmm.
and this text frames them in a very interesting way.
Right.
It talks about them as the body, the mind, the emotions,
Interesting.
and the dharma.
Mm.
So, pretty different.
Yeah.
From the traditional understanding of suffering, the origin of suffering, cessation of suffering.
Yeah. It's quite a different framing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the path. So let's see what we can
Pick up sleeves.
unpack here. What really stuck out to me right away
Yeah.
was this definition of the body.
Mm-hmm.
It says, the mind of the body is the view of the four great harmonies falsely called the body.
Mm. Yeah, it's an intriguing statement for sure. It really kind of makes you stop and think about what we even consider to be our physical self.
Right. Like what is this thing that we're walking around in?
Right. So breaking that down a little bit, those four great harmonies, how do you see those connecting
Yeah. What is?
to the concept of the body?
Yeah.
Well, the text links them to the four elements: earth, water, fire, and wind.
Okay.
And, in many spiritual traditions, and you find this in Buddhism as well, these elements, they're not just seen as just, physical substances.
Right. Yeah. They're a little more
They represent these, kind of fundamental,
symbolic.
yeah, almost symbolic, you could say, qualities that make up existence. So, earth is often associated with solidity, water with fluidity, fire with energy, and wind with change.
Okay, so, instead of looking at our bodies as these, fixed things, we should kind of see them as these interacting forces.
Exactly. And that idea of the body being falsely called the body, it could be hinting at this really core Buddhist concept of impermanence. The idea that everything is in this constant state of flux, nothing is really fixed. Right. Our bodies are constantly changing, They're a temporary arrangement of these elements.
Yeah, it's pretty radical when you think about it that way.
It is.
Because, we kind of think of ourselves as like,
Yeah, we do.
this person in this body.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that then with,
Yeah.
The traditional view of suffering,
Right.
as the first noble truth?
That's where things get, I think, really interesting, because the traditional understanding, like you said, emphasizes the nature of suffering, the cause of suffering, and then the path to liberation from that suffering.
Yeah.
This interpretation that we're looking at here,
Yeah.
it seems to be more about emphasizing understanding the nature of reality itself. You know? So with the body, mind, emotions, and dharma as these foundational truths that need to be investigated and understood. So it's kind of a different...
So it's less about eliminating suffering and more about just knowing yourself.
Yeah, understanding these
and the world
core components of our being.
Right. Interesting.
And how they all work together. It's like saying, in order to understand reality, you have to first understand your body. And not just as, this collection of flesh and bones, but as this interplay of these four elements.
Yeah. How would we
so as a practical
use this information?
Example.
How would we do that?
Yeah, so think about, for example, the feeling of your breath.
Okay.
Right. So instead of just seeing it as air coming in and out, you can recognize it as the wind element, right?
Oh, okay.
Manifesting in your body. And that can kind of bring a deeper awareness even to that simple act of breathing.
Yeah, that's a really great example. It's you can probably feel it.
It makes it less abstract and more something that you can actually experience, Yeah,
it's not just a philosophy.
Exactly.
Like a way of life.
Yeah. And, if we apply that same thinking to the mind of the body, it's we can become more attuned to all of our physical sensations. So we start to notice these subtle shifts in energy,
Yeah.
The solidity of our bones, the fluidity of our movements, and this mindful awareness of the body, it becomes this gateway to understanding these deeper truths about our existence.
So then I guess my question is, how do we then take action in the world?
Right.
If everything is impermanent and changing,
does
that lead to apathy?
That's a great question. And it doesn't necessarily lead to apathy.
Yeah.
Recognizing impermanence doesn't negate the reality of our experiences, right?
Yeah.
It just shifts our perspective on them. So knowing that everything changes, it can actually make us more present, more engaged in life, appreciating each moment as it arises, because we know it's not going to last forever.
So it's not detachment. It's more just like appreciating the
Exactly.
fleeting nature of it all.
Yeah, that's a very powerful concept. It's a reminder to really be fully present with each experience, whether it's, joy or sorrow, because it's all going to pass.
Okay. So we've unpacked the body as the first noble truth. What about, so we've got mind, emotions, and dharma.
Right.
How does pasted text?
Yeah.
Look at those.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't go into great detail about those aspects,
Okay.
But we can sort of extrapolate a little bit based on what we've seen so far.
Okay.
So if the body is falsely called the body, maybe the mind and emotions are also constructs that we need to deconstruct a little bit.
Because we have to kind of question those things, just like we're questioning this idea of like a fixed physical form.
It's challenging us to really kind of examine our assumptions about all of these things.
Yeah. And where does dharma fit in?
And that's where dharma comes in.
Okay.
So dharma, in this context, I think we can look at it as sort of the underlying truth or reality that connects all things.
Okay.
So it's like this thread that runs through the body, the mind, and the emotions.
Okay.
It binds them all together.
So it's pushing us to look beyond the surface of these things, not as separate entities, but as all interconnected.
That's a great way to put it.
In some way.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe one of the most valuable takeaways from this whole deep dive is that it's challenging us to reconsider these really fundamental assumptions about, who we are, how we fit in the world. Okay. It's
a different way of looking at
reframing.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, the big question is, if our body is falsely called the body, right? With all these elements in constant change.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about, the world around us and our place in it?
Yeah.
Something for us all to think about.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.